Welcome, everybody. Thank you for your patience. We had a couple technical difficulties, but we are ready to rock. And I'm so excited. My name is Jared. I'm one of the team members with Podcast Movement. Today, the session is Beginner Podcast Techniques with Ryan White. Ryan, we are thrilled that you're here. You are a product specialist with Rode. And why don't you just tell a little bit about yourself and then just slide right into the session. I'm going to disappear, but I'll still be available to jump in later for questions if needed. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
And Jared, thanks so much for having me, man. This is great. Love Podcast Movement. Very sad that we can't be in person. Hoping for, some more, in-person stuff next year. I already looked into the schedule for next year, slapped that on the calendar and everything. But one thing I'll tell you too, Jared, is that as we talked over the phone too, I like to keep this very open forum. If anybody's asked questions in the chats, feel free to interrupt me and actually throw me back in there, and I'll incorporate them into the class, because I do want to not just talk about some tech and kind of geek out a little bit, but have some interaction with everybody to answer some questions specifically to things that you have going on. But other than that, like you said, I am Rode's U.S. product specialist, and inside of that job, I get to travel the whole U.S. and teach people about microphones, about our gear. A lot of retailers and various things like that that sell our microphones that will use them in either podcasting, video, and all that stuff. So, if you're not familiar with Rode, we have what's called the Rode Diffs. It's all our microphones are made in Australia at a very high quality. We laid the metal, powder coat them to a military spec. All the stuff that you're touching from Rode is coming straight from Australia. And there's the warehouse as it stands out in Australia. And it's a wonderful place for them to actually fully make all the microphones and everything, and make sure that you have just all the best options right there for you. So today with the podcast techniques and stuff, I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on with my setup, and then that's going to be incorporated into the class. Obviously with Rode, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Rode stuff. As the product specialist, it's my job to educate not only on what I have in front of me, what I'm using and things like that, but how does that incorporate into things you're trying to do? How do you actually make your podcast work? Are you using other companies and various things like that? I'm a non-commissioned salesman, so I like to lovingly say that I'm the mic geek, and I'm going to teach you about all things inside of podcasting from a technical standpoint, not so much from a sales standpoint. So right now I'm using the Rode PodMic, the Rode PSA-1 boom arm. I'm using an ATEM Mini for the video connection that you're seeing. Couple lights, a Lumix GH3 out in front of me. And then the Rodecaster Pro is actually right down here as well. I'm not sure if you might be able to see just the touch of that, but the audio is actually going through Pro channel 1, and then back over to the USB input on the computer that I'm connecting through to get to all of you on AirMeet. So pretty standard setup, but when you add the video aspect into it, it does get a little bit crazier. And I'm actually here at Bedford Camera in Oklahoma City. I'm doing their PhotoCon this year, and we planned this podcast movement thing a long time ago. So I just asked them if they didn't care that if I used their back room. So if you hear anything going on, that's because they're running an event. They were very nice to give me the nice set here, nice brick wall behind me in their camera shop. So if anything's going on, then my job was to try and minimize a lot of that. So what we're going to talk about is some of the choices that I made, knowing that I might be in this room. Let me switch back over to the thing. So what we used to do before the Rodecaster Pro, before some of the Zoom gear, a lot of the stuff that we had, you're using external recorders, just a quick, and they're still very valuable. I want everybody to know that anything that's going on inside of this slide is not saying that's gone. The NT-USB, still very popular microphone for Rode. The NT-USB Mini, with it being added into our lineup, incredible microphone, very small format, very easy to use, plug and play type situation. So just getting started, those are a great place to start. In fact, later on, I'll actually go through some pros and cons of USB microphones so that you can have a little bit more information on what and why, if you're not ready to jump into a full podcast situation like the Rodecaster Pro. One microphone and Omni, things like that. Please don't do that. With one of those microphones, there's nothing wrong with doing it. I will always tell you that the technique can be done. It's just about optimizing your quality. What we want to do is we stair step through a bunch of things to try to incrementally increase our quality. When you actually just throw one microphone out in the middle of a bunch of people, it's very hard to keep everybody consistent. Not only that, your room is going to be coming into that microphone more or just as much as everybody in that room. If somebody moves closer or farther away, then you're going to hear that. All of those things can end up being a very problematic recording later. And then you're going to be in editing for 8 hours. So be cautious of that. A lot of what I'm talking about today is the setup, the pre-production to make your podcast better. USB microphones, bunch of editing, multiple gear, multiple streams and feeds. That's still a thing, right? If you're using any one of the 1,200 applications out there, web-based, Chrome-based, software, I like to call a vidcast, just like I'm doing it now. I essentially could be a podcast and videos involved. So you're doing the video and the podcasting all together at the same time. A lot of people are doing that these days. The other thing too is that we're trying to minimize signal flow. So we used to have to run 50 different devices, try to do one thing. And a lot of times that was a phone call. Those streams that we were talking about, trying to run those through your signal flow was a very challenging thing to do. So with the Rodecaster Pro, especially, the reason that we created that device is to actually put it all into one board. I'm sure you're aware of, if you're aware of the Rodecaster Pro, you have 4 microphone channels, then you have your USB, TRRS for a phone connection directly, Bluetooth, all those things. That way, all you do is plug it into that board, and then on your way you go. You can record it locally, so therefore. Now, I don't want to talk just about that all day long, but that is what we're talking about, right? We're upgrading from, say, something simple like this and basic, perfectly acceptable for your podcast, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, to something like this, into, I don't even care if it's an 16 digital board or anything like that. It depends on how many inputs you have and so forth, and you keep working on it. So a few things we are going to talk about: microphone selection, microphone setup, and then I did promise the USB pros and cons. And then we'll leave it on a little bit at the end of the class too for some questions that you can ask directly. When we're talking microphone selection, it's the same thing. Oh, switch over on me. There we go. So microphone selection is going to be pretty common topic, right? What microphone am I selecting? Why am I doing it? Why do I care? One of my things is I always, as simple as just, hey, I got $30 and I need a microphone. Can you do work with any of those? Absolutely. But you should be asking yourself a few other questions first. And I usually have 3 things. For podcasting and simplifying, I'll actually simplify that down to 2 things. And that's the type and the polar pattern. If you haven't heard of those words before, the type would be these 2 things right in front of you, which are dynamic and condenser. So a dynamic microphone would be the PodMic is a perfect example. Our bigger brother, the Procaster. The Podcaster is a dynamic microphone with a USB output. A bunch of different ones, just standard, SD8, Rode M1 are dynamic microphones that are meant to control the sound. They're very affordable, but you do need to plug them in most cases XLR into some kind of preamp and boost the signal and so forth. The diaphragm of that microphone, what is actually reading signal, is heavier. It's got a piece of metal that's going to capture your voice, vibrate, and then move what's called a voice coil across a magnet. That's harder to do than a condenser microphone, which is actually a back with that small piece of metal. And that piece of metal, just as it moves closer and farther away from that back plate, is what is creating your audio signal. So it's very, very easy to move that very thin piece of metal across or back and forth closer and farther away from that back plate than it is to actually move the voice coil forward and backwards. So condenser microphone, and why do I care, is going to be very easy to move. And how that translates to us as humans is it's very sensitive. It's going to pick up everything. So if I was using a condenser microphone in this room, as I said, with an event going on outside down the hallway, cars passing by, the dogs down the hallway barking, all of those things are going to come into that condenser microphone way more than any of the other stuff that I could pick. So right there, first thing you're picking, if you have those things in your shot, or where you're trying to podcast, then you're going to want to start with a dynamic microphone. Again, USB or XLR, it doesn't matter. So this is actually an XLR microphone, professional standard for cabling. That would need to run another device. So again, it is going to kind of inherently be more expensive, but it is all going to depend. And I apologize for always saying it depends, but it really is going to kind of depend on all of those factors. And you have to decide what those factors are that you need to overcome. So a condenser microphone, when might choose a condenser microphone, and why do I care about that? Condenser microphone is often used in more professional studios or more controlled spaces. If you are one of the people that are using their large walk-in closet with a bunch of clothes, carpet, floor, maybe even some panels up to try and even deaden that closet a little bit more, condenser microphone would be just fine for you. What it translates as in tone is more natural, open. It's words like synonyms we use like airy, and it just sounds very natural to the human voice. And we use it a lot in voice acting and audiobooks and things that are actually going to try to really clarify what that person's voice sounds like and bring out a lot of that character. But a dynamic microphone, again, it's less sensitive, but it sounds bigger. The closer you get to it, you can take advantage of what's called proximity effect. And the further you get away from it, the more it's going to reduce the sound. So you got to be cautious of it. And it's an ebb and flow, an in and out of choosing which one's right for you. If you're a beginner and you're just starting out and you're like, I'm going to buy your phone just because somebody else uses it, reconsider for 2 seconds a few things in your space. You're going to probably have a better time later. So keep that in mind. Should be switching over here. There it is. No, it didn't. There we are. Polar pattern. Sorry about that. The polar patterns are going to be the directionality of the microphone. So if you're in front of the microphone, look at these images, and actually I will show this image as well. Polar patterns. These are how we see them on data sheets. It's how Rode will tell you inside of their data sheet for, say, the PodMic. And this is just a 3D image, a great image actually of what that means to us in real life, right? If you're actually looking at this microphone, how to actually approach it to take advantage of a polar pattern. These are going to be the most common. Cardioid pattern versus omni pattern is probably the two most common questions and concerns about podcasting. Which one do I want to choose, right? Some very beginner buy-it microphones are going to be omnidirectional, and a lot of professional or more standardized for podcasting microphones are going to be cardioid. Super and hypercardioid are typically shotgun microphones, and you should be cautious of those because they do let a little bit of audio in from the back. Sometimes they can be condenser microphones and so forth, but this is my second rule and thing to check if you are considering buying a microphone for your podcast. What you're getting from this, and I'll take you back to the image, is not just where do I put my voice, how do I talk to this microphone, but more importantly, where is it rejecting sound? So in a cardioid pattern, right up the middle here, you're rejecting right behind the microphone. So in the case of my PodMic, a cardioid dynamic microphone, you're actually going to cancel out or reduce all of the sound. Not 1 second, I have to catch myself. You're never going to get rid of all the sound, but right here at the null point, as we call it, that's going to really significantly reduce it. All the events that I was talking about are happening that way. There's a wall right over there. My voice is going to bounce off that wall and come back. It's a way, but I'm using the back of this microphone to turn all of that down. So the goal here, your approach to this, is to point it towards the bad noise. What makes me more of a professional in, say, audio for film or otherwise is not necessarily what I capture, but more importantly, what I get. If an airplane's flying overhead or anything like that, you want to reduce that sound or take it out of your recording entirely, right? If the dog is barking, you either have to try to reduce it as much as humanly possible so that it's not something you have to concern yourself with all the time, or you have to get the sound to go. You have to put the dog outside or record at a different time or some other thing, re-record, things like that. So I'm just telling you that with the cardioid pattern or the polar pattern selection, you're going to point that null point at things that are happening around you that are not so great. And that's going to help reduce that sound. So going back to the presentation, when you do omnidirectional, you'll notice that it doesn't reduce anything, right? And if we look at the polar pattern, as you'll see on a data sheet, the red circle is just completely encompassing a 360 degree. It's everywhere. And so I understand that it's going to be picking up more things. Acoustically speaking, how it sounds tonally, it doesn't have proximity effects. So it's a very natural sounding microphone. Again, it's going to be one of those things where you're going to use it for performance-based items or capturing the space or for even-toned recordings in a professional studio, it's not typically going to be a great selection for a beginner when they're trying to overcome a lot of the other problems. After that, we're considering things like roll-offs, pads, preamps. If you are in fact using some of the Rode microphones that actually have some of these buttons on them for shotgun microphones, take advantage of them. I can't stress it enough how much just having an option on your microphone or on your recorder inside of the Rodecaster Pro, it has a roll-off. It actually does have the noise gate. Bypass filter is also the same thing as a roll-off. It's getting rid of low frequencies so that when you're actually recording, say an air conditioner just rumbling in the background, you hear that brrr all the time through your recording, a roll-off is going to just simply sweep that down, turning down those low frequencies. Your Rodecaster Pro has it on it. The human voice doesn't get down to those lower frequencies on average. In fact, for the Rodecaster Pro, I think you can go up to 200. At that point, you're going to roll off to actually affect the human voice, and you want to do that artistically. But for the most part, they're going to start at like 80, 75 hertz. The human voice isn't going to get down there. So take advantage of that. Get rid of some of the noise that's happening, some of those table hits and things like that. Yeah, shock mount is always very handy for that, but you're going to want to make sure that you roll off some of those. Things like compression and stuff like that, when you can get it inside of your software or inside of the hardware like the Rodecaster Pro or the Zoom devices, when you can actually limit some levels and make sure you're controlling inside of that level, it's very advantageous to, it's very smart to take advantage of that and use those things to actually even you out throughout your production. But going back to here, one of the things you're going to get with such things like preamps. So an example of a preamp that is often talked about in podcast would actually be a cloud lifter. Now, it's not exactly a preamp, quote unquote, because it's taking mic level to mic level, but it's boosting it by a significant number. I think if memory serves, it's about 20 decibels, 30 decibels. Point I'm getting at is it's taking that microphone signal, something like a dynamic microphone that is less sensitive, right? So less sensitive in this microphone, and I can run that cable out to a cloud lifter. I'm actually doing that right now. Just heads up, everybody. Cloud lifter is actually then going to boost it up, go into channel 1, turn on phantom power because you're going to need that power for either a condenser microphone or in this case for the cloud lifter. And it's going to boost that level up before it ever even gets to the Rodecaster Pro. There's nothing wrong with the Rodecaster Pro. But to add a little cleaner tone, the more you turn up a preamp or any gear for that matter, the more noise and more hiss you're going to get into it. So adding a preamp or some kind of boost to that is really going to help you out. So a lot of the video mics and then some devices like that can really help you inside of your signal flow to make it all the tones sound better. A topic that I can't ever take out of my pods classes because I do a lot of tech support for Rode, and I enjoy it so much, helping everybody out there talk about what they're trying to set up and how they want to accomplish their podcast, what's going on in their life. When you look at the computers, there's two things that I have to have you looking at before you ever try to set up your audio. And this goes for a camera as well. I think I have a slide that I'm going to talk about here in just a little bit. But with the computer, you need to make three things happy whenever you're doing your podcast, whenever you're setting it up. You need your hardware to be happy, you need your operating system to be happy, and you need your software to be happy. And those three things, if any one of them gets a little angry, you're probably you're not going to get the audio. It's going to be distorted or sound poor, or you might even be using like another onboard microphone and not even know you're doing it. Same for using like phones and stuff like that. That's very common. But let's say in the case of my Rodecaster Pro that I'm using today, right? The Rodecaster Pro is the hardware, obviously, USB over into the computer. Computer's running a Mac system. I think Catalina, apologize. But the Catalina is the operating system, and that's running the brains of the operation inside the computer. And then we're on AirMeet. That's my software, i.e. Chrome. I'm actually on a Chrome browser right now. So that's our software. We have to make all three of those things happy if we're doing things, especially in a virtual world right now. I think I'm kind of leaning on this. It's not an everyday podcast thing. A lot of times you would record locally, but I'm leaning on this because a lot of us are doing this remote these days. But when you go back to this, you need to go into and make sure it's selecting your hardware before you ever open anything else. So if you're looking at both these slides, you got an input and output for Mac, you have an input and output for Windows, and I'll do you one more, and that's that you can actually customize your application settings inside of Windows. So in Windows 10 specifically is what you're looking at here. It's what I use at home as well. You're actually able to go into Chrome and say, I want to use the default settings with the Rodecaster Pro stereo. And then when you plug that in, it's going to kick back and use that. Once you make the operating system happy and just acknowledge that, hey, I'm using this outboard gear, I'm using this piece like an NT USB or some form of USB microphone, I don't care which, you're telling it to use that as a default. And then once you open the software, you would want to make sure that it's also using that same device as its default. So if you're on a Zoom call, if you're running it into a DAW, Digital Audio Workstation, for those of you that don't know, like GarageBand, Pro Tools, popular ones, Reaper and Audacity, any Adobe users out there, you have to open software and then tell it, hey, I'm also using this stuff, so that all three can work together cohesively, both input and output, and on your way you go. It's the easy way to make sure that before you really start, you're not setting yourself up for failure before you start. So the other thing too is with those outboard gear, outboard pieces, you have something like a audio interface. Focusrite 2i2, very popular in the podcast space. The Rode AI1, same thing. It's single channel though. And then, as I mentioned, the Rodecaster Pro. If you look at the Rodecaster Pro image here, I like to teach in my classes that these are, let's see if this is the setup real fast. Nope, this is the set I have for this. So I like to teach this as a 100% scale. Okay, so if you're looking at your camera, right? I'm using a GH3 for this video. If I go back and plug in a Rode microphone to that camera, I'll have actually have vertical meter on that, but then inside my settings, I have a horizontal meter. I teach it as 100% scale. Most devices these days are digital. They have what's called 0 dBFS as the top peak in the volume. Again, super nerdy stuff. So to back up just a little bit, if I talk about it as 100% scale, most cases, the audio level I want is around 70, 75%. It's going to depend on which engineer you talk to, who taught you, what you're trying to accomplish, right? Tonality wise, stuff like that. But on average, just a good level is 70, 75% of that meter. So when we switch back over to this image, if I watch those green bars jump through, and Rode did a nice thing and put that pretty little green bar on there so that you can actually watch your average. I'm actually watching my averages jump right now, and I'm hitting right into that green bar. And then I can actually switch up and down, or in the case of the AI1 or your 2i2, the left-hand side. I'm sorry. Yeah, it would be left-hand side for you guys. My screen's mirrored, sorry. The gain would be on the left-hand side, and you just turn it up until you start getting good averages. And in the case of that, you got green to yellow to red, so that yellow or amber is kind of a nice target. When you just barely touching into that yellow, you're there. And then Focusrite has theirs. Every other device is going to have theirs. If you're not checking that, you're possibly distorting all of your signal before it ever even does anything, before you ever record it, before you ever send it somewhere. So it's crucial that we check those levels. Mac operating system, going into Audacity, all those things. It's what's called gain staging. And you should be checking that to make sure that what levels you're getting are going to be both good for editing, quieter and noise floor, better sounding overall, and definitely not distorted, right? Because you definitely don't want to get to post editing and find out that everything's just a brick, a squared off wave. So inside of microphone setup, I just want to touch on a couple other things, because I know that there's going to be people out there that are using iPhones or Android or I even put this picture just because this is a common conversation that I have with many people, iPads, right? So I'm sure there's a bunch of people out there using iPads and various setup devices that might be doing video, might be doing audio, might be their straight up audio recorder for their podcast, right? Just in and straight out. your adapters are crucial to everything that you're doing when you're trying to connect a microphone to upgrade your tone. With the cabling, so here we have the Lav Go from Rode. We have an adapter that's called the SC4, and that's taking a 3-pin connection, TRS, over to a TRRS 4-pin connector. I can't stress this enough. And I mean no harm to anybody, and I definitely don't mean to insult anybody. 4 pins is not black lines. So if you're out there and you're curious if you're counting the black lines on those cables, those are actually insulators. They're separating the metal that would actually be a voltage conductor and actually passing signal. So when you're counting them, count the gold, the silver connectors on those cables instead. So if you look at the SC4, you'll notice 3 black lines separating 4 gold connectors. And if you have been fortunate enough to not have to go diving headfirst into this conversation, the reason we have 4-pin connectors now instead of 3 is because of smart devices. So iPhones and Android, obviously a big factor in there. Phone companies decided that they wanted bidirectional information. So they want a microphone to go into the phone and they wanted head to come back out. So you need 4 pins to make that happen. You have a mic and ground going in, and then your left and right stereo outputs coming back to some headphones sharing that same ground. 4 connections, mic, ground, left and right sharing the ground. And when you do that, then you get bidirectional information all on 1 pin. The phone companies get to put 1 jack on your phone, change it into a lightning cable later, USB-C later, on and on we go, losing our minds. So just be aware of that in signal flow conversation. When you are changing those things, you need to keep them very much the same. Rode also has a series of cables called the Smart Cable Series SC. So like I said, the SC4 is going to be a huge bonus or add-on. It was a huge bonus and add-on for Rode, especially for a guy like me helping a lot of customers try to solve their signal flow problems. So look into those if you're having some of that issue, and feel free to reach out to us too if you need the help. Finally, we'll talk a little bit about USB microphones and the pros and cons. And I need to reiterate, just like I talked about with like types of microphones or who's making them or where they come from, you can use anything for the most part, right? There's definitely rules. Most rules are meant to be broken, but once you understand them, with USB microphones, I'd never start the conversation with which is better. The conversation really has to start with how are you using it, right? A USB microphone, especially today's age, has increased in quality so much. So just because I'm using XLR microphone today, it's because I want things like options and so forth. Getting ahead of myself because this is in the slide, but it's not bad just because it's USB. It's not good just because it's XLR. And if you don't set it up correctly or use it properly, it's bad either way. So when we're talking about USB, some of the pros are definitely going to be like, hey, it's portable, right? So you got the VideoMic NTG on the right-hand side, and you got the NT USB Mini on the left. Man, this flip screen thing is really messing with me. But they're pull. You got everything into the box. No mixers, no audio interfaces. They're plug and play in most cases. And they're inexpensive because there's not as much gear. It's kind of the jack of all trades, master of none conversation where everything's in the one box. And they're fairly easy to use. So when we're talking about that, when they're portable, that's very cool. But what you need to acknowledge is that then becomes your hardware, right? We talked earlier about your setup for your computer and how your hardware has to be happy with your operating system. Your operating system has to be happy with your hardware or software, sorry. And when you're doing that, just because you're using a USB microphone, it does not mean that went away. Just because that physical box doesn't exist in front of your face like the Rodecaster Pro might or an 2i2 might, it's inside of those USB microphones. So the sound card, as it were, the digital information that's actually allowing these things to talk to the computer are just living right inside of these small microphones. That's how easy they've gotten to be built, and then how small they've gotten as far as the circuitry and so forth. But what's some bad things about it? Well, they are less versatile. So I was talking about an XLR microphone being a chosen piece by me because I can actually switch this microphone out and I change nothing else. I can turn this into an RE20 just by going to get an RE20 and popping it on there. SM7B, no, it's a popular one. I can make that happen. If this was an NT USB, I wouldn't be able to just simply make that SM7B plug into that USB cable. Please don't buy the adapter cables. They're not very good. And they're probably just going to cause you more harm than anything, because you're going to take a good microphone, dumb it down into something small that's not very functional, and not do that job properly. If you ever have the conversation of, should I go to XLR, ask yourself, do I have the budget first and foremost? Second of all, am I going to stay at XLR from there on out? I got to go get the interface. I go buy the XLR cables, get the stuff that's going to go along with an XLR microphone. If not, stick around at the USB microphones for a little while until you get that going, or until you have a need. If you're not going to use it, there's no reason to get it, right? After that, you're pretty much, and this is changing every day, you're pretty much limited to that one microphone plugging in USB and microphones. And you're probably wondering why I'm hesitating. For some of the experienced out there, some people who have dove down the rabbit hole, you've heard of things like an aggregate device, or some of you can set up multiple computers and do different connection things. That's totally acceptable, but it does take an elaborate setup, right? So all of a sudden, we're no longer in the conversation of easy, not versatile, and easy to use, plug and play, all that stuff. We're now getting into basically manipulating an XLR microphone at that point, if we're trying to change those what's the word I'm looking for, those setup pieces, or the characteristics of the microphone. That's what I'm trying to get at. So trying to plug two USB microphones into my two MacBook Pro USB ports, totally plausible. Create an aggregate device, bring them both in. If you want more on that, please feel free to reach out to us at any point. But it's not something we'll talk about too heavily today, because today we're mostly talking about one microphone, or if you are using two, maybe you upgrade into an XLR that has multiple inputs and so forth. After that, it's not going to be able to upgrade or change or swap out individual components. So it's that same conversation of, I want an RE20 now. Now I have to buy a bunch of other things to get that RE20. I want the pod mic. Cool, it's affordable. It's going to work the way that I need it to work, and need more microphones, right? So those are questions you're asking yourself as you go, and then you're setting them up through another device and having that flexibility. So if the answer to that question is, would I like to individualize each component and have the choices that I was talking about previously, XLR is where you're going to typically start. It already solves that problem. So the benefits of XLR are just going to be a lot of the opposites of these cons from a USB microphone. And then the same benefits, the cons of an XLR microphone would typically be the opposites of those USB pros. So they're not going to be they're not as portable, just because you have 3 pieces of gear. If you have more pieces of gear, it's not as portable, and you would have to have that outboard gear, all that stuff. So you can see how it is straight up the opposite of each other for the most part. There's probably a lot of pros out there going, I can work around it. I understand that. It's absolutely a conversation you can have, but these are the basics and the starting points for these devices. And that's pretty much what I have for you all from a standpoint of the nerdy and so forth. Jared, if you're hanging out with us, man, has there been any questions on the chat? I would love to dive into some application questions, some very specific questions for some of our guests, if they are there.
Yeah, let's open them up. Let's see what we got here. And then we also potentially have some questions on Facebook and YouTube, so I'll see if I can get some help curating those.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks for letting me geek out there for 30 minutes, and I hope I didn't bore everybody too much. But
oh, no, it's all good. Okay, so a couple questions here. One of them is, what's your recommendation for a new podcaster? You probably touched on this. New podcaster in terms of basic startup gear. What would you tell someone new? Hey, maybe try going with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you never, especially like if you're talking sales conversation, I'm gonna take off the sales hat for a second, right, and just be Ryan White, the audio engineer. But my first question for you are gonna not be in sales. Definitely not gonna be like, what's your budget? If I'm producing you, right, and that's the question of how do I start and what do I do? My first question is probably going to be budget, because we talk about NT-USB mics. The Mini, I'm sorry, is $99, right? But a podcast, the pod mic's $99. So we're now just kind of pulling hairs up. Guess what though? When you buy a pod mic, you need an audio interface. You need the AI1. You need an H5 or some kind of external recorder. So the reason I asked for the budget first is not so much for pulling money out of your pockets. It's straight up for asking yourself, are you ready to go to that stage, right? For beginners, a USB microphone is going to be amazing, but you're going to have to ask yourself also all the questions I asked about type of microphone. How's your room? Do you need sensitivity because you're in a good room and you want to be natural sounding? Condenser microphone, right? So the NT-USB, NT-USB Mini, a lot of those could really suit you. But if you're absolutely not going to need, or I'm sorry, not want a condenser microphone, and you need a dynamic microphone, you're almost instantly jumping over to an XLR microphone. Now, there are a few XLR microphones out there. Really hoping for one from Rode very soon. No idea if that's a thing in the plans or anything like that. This is just, again, Ryan White talking. But a USB dynamic microphone is a great, great, great place to start. You're going to isolate a lot of things in the room, meaning get rid of them, right? There's people talking down the hallway and so forth. Plug in easy with a USB mic, and it's run and gun. So that's typically where people are starting. Most people have a computer already. If you don't have a computer already, get yourself an external recorder and a pod mic, and on your way you go.
Okay, so it looks like Jennifer has a comment here. I guess she's looking for options for mobile. Can you kind of touch on that again?
Absolutely. So one of the big things we did talk about was analog, right? I didn't touch on Lightning and USB-C too much. That is very much where the world's pivoting on that. So talking about an iPhone Lightning port, Rode actually has the iXLR, which is an unbelievable little add-on. Again, our Smart Cable series is going to be an analog adapter, like literal cable adapter. Our iXLR is actually an XLR input. It's mostly used for like reporting, right? But the point here is that it just takes a dynamic microphone, XLR, into a Lightning port, and makes the phone and helps the phone understand that, hey, this person's trying to actually use a microphone. It's got a headphone jack on it, everything. Then, just like I talked about with computers, you need to make sure your phone is accepting that input. And phones are the most fickle out there, I promise you. What I like to do is actually lightly scratch the capsule. So I apologize to everybody out there, but you'll hear this. If I just do a check, 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 my phone is sitting right here doing my test, right? And it's just there, check, 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 check. I don't know if it's using this or we're using that built-in microphone. And the problem is it's going to switch and you will never know it. So to test if your phone is actually using that mic, then you just lightly scratch it. So play it back. And if you hear that scratch, you know it's using that microphone, because this isn't going to pick it up even if I do it like this closely. So with the iXLR, what you have is the ability to go get that dynamic XLR microphone. Rode has the M1, plugs it in, no power needed. Then it's got a headphone output for you to monitor. You should be using headphones if you're podcasting. You don't want speakers running in the room. I did mean to add that to the presentation, but here we are. So yes, headphones, very crucial, mostly for feedback. If a speaker comes out and goes into the microphone, it'll start a really, really bad squelch. But also it could just create delay and echo and things like that in your recording. So headphones are pretty important. So you have that ability with the iXLR, and then that will overtake the phone's sound card and let you plug that XLR microphone right into, say, your GarageBand on your iPhone.
Okay, we have a question from, we got from Gary. Hey, Ryan, can you please touch a little bit on mic placement when recording?
Love it. One of my favorite conversations, and I'm going to toot my own horn just a little bit real fast, but my boss actually, on one of our calls, this has been a while back, I think the Rodecaster Pro had just come out, but I had set up my pod mic kind of like you're seeing it right now. I think at the time I was a little bit, because I wasn't on the PSA-1, but you'll notice I'm actually off about 30 degrees, and And I'm actually 3 inches away from this microphone, though it may not. It's kind of harder to tell with the camera's depth of field, but yeah, it's tell. The point I'm getting at is I'm 3 inches off, and I don't want to necessarily be eating the microphone. I told you I apologize for it depends all the time. You're going to be listening for your microphone's characteristics. Am I on a condenser mic? Am I on a pod mic? Am I on an SMB? 7B is way dark. It's actually got a huge pop filter, a lot of distance, and it's got a really textured sound. Like it sounds like a 7B. That's what it sounds like, right? Pod mic is actually more open sounding. It's a $99 broadcast microphone, right? So get more average. It's trying to capture more people. And again, that's Ryan White kind of evaluating that. There's no quote there. I'm just saying that it's a wider open frequency response. So it's going to be cleaner sounding. It's going to be brighter sounding. Some people don't like that. People do. And a condenser microphone, you're going to hear every lip smack, every breath. And, you know, you're not really relaxed and say you need to breathe hard. Microphone a lot more. So placement is going to be dependent on those, choices that you've made. I chose to go a little bit to the side because that's going to pick up and allow me, it's going to pick up my voice very well, take advantage of some of the proximity effect, which is that boost in the low end, and allow the air and the smacks and some of the higher frequencies to kind of just right past the microphone. And when you're doing that, it just also allows me to be a little more natural in front of camera. I chose this as a producer or a director, if you will, also because if we were doing this and I'm here the whole time, this is what you saw of me. And as I moved closer to that microphone, you probably heard it actually boost and enhance some of those lower frequencies. I've been working with a lady, a very nice lady who does a lot of meditation videos, just meditation podcast, and she talks very soft. She's got a mid-rangey, higher frequency voice, but talks very soft and very slow. And if you're doing that, you almost have to get closer to the microphone because you're going to be talking so low that your levels aren't going to be able to be increased and things like that. So if I get closer, I'm going to enhance that tone this way. If I get farther away, it's going to be more natural and spacious. And you can probably notice as I get farther away, and I'm even talking louder, it gets like worse and worse and worse just because of the room that I'm in or otherwise. So you're deciding on those things. Do I want low end enhancement? Do I want a more natural tone of what's actually happening with my mouth? Am I on camera? So do I have to actually move it away? And is my room okay to where I can actually get a natural tone from maybe it being on my desktop? For Twitch streamers and things like that, the NT USB works amazingly because it's on a desktop and it might be over here, pointed back up towards them. Not a lot going on, maybe up over there or anything like that, but they can just sit there and be themselves, play their game. And that's capturing the space that you're in. What is happening there? If you're on a podcast, that's typically frowned upon because it's just your voice. So having richer tone, having clearer, more intimate tone is what the radio has trained us to like and so forth. So get that microphone right up on you. Take the room out of the sound as much as you possibly can. And also it's going to just make your life a lot easier from that gain structure conversation and all that. So sorry for the ramble. That was probably a lot more than just, hey, place it 3 inches from your mouth and 30 degrees off. But that's why.
I love it. Okay, so man. We got a question from Josie. Josie wants to know what are your must requirements regarding, or what's your high recommendation for soundproofing?
Oh, I love it. Great question. You're gonna laugh at me. I'll give you 2 answers. So the first one you can laugh. The second one I'll give you the real answer. The first one is heavy moving blankets. $15 at any thrift store, or I think you can even buy them from U-Haul now. So heavy moving blankets are thick, dense, and almost perfect size for just drapery. So I get a lot of calls and talk with a lot of customers, right, that are like, whew, so $200 to RLX. Nothing wrong with RLX, by the way. Great stuff. More on that in a second on the real answer. Moving blankets are amazing because literally you can take 3 $15 mic stands, strap them up with, zip ties, and tarp yourself in. Okay. And For those of you that don't know it out there, what you're trying to do is get rid of reflections, and specifically what are called first reflections. I mentioned that wall that's over there that my polar pattern is helping reduce. One, I'm at an angle from it, but right behind my camera is a wall and a mirror. And so if this was my professional home studio or even my actual studio, right, like I'd have to take care of that wall. There is a trick out there to also place them, but with moving blankets and stands, what you're going to accomplish is moving your walls closer to you and making them you're going to block that reflection right away, right? So my voice is going to hit that blanket, get reduced significantly, bounce off that window and wall still, and then come back to the backside of that moving blanket. It's hardly going to get back to me. There's a lot of conversations. Some of you pros out there are probably already going like, you know, there's no soundproofing. I promise you that. This is what's called reflection filtering. You're just trying to keep the frequencies from bouncing around you. So 3 moving blankets or 4. If you can take care of the roof or ceiling, even better if you're in an office. Floating ceilings, I think is what they're called. I'm actually looking up at one right now, but it's 10, 12 feet up. It's not as big of a problem, but tabletops. Yeah. This table right in front of me. First walls. Okay, so foam padding. I only have one rule. I don't care about the brand. RLX is amazing. They're very quick on that stuff. Everybody has them, and they're not too bad price, right? Go for the 2. I know, and I understand that 1 inch is going to be cheaper and so forth, but from an engineer who is talking more about how frequencies actually react, if you're in a small bedroom, I promise you get the 2 inch. The reason is because you're strapping that directly to a wall. It's easier for frequencies to hit that foam and then bounce off the wall and come back to you. And if you have 1 inch, it's going to do it. It's hardly going to slow it down. And it's also hitting the wall almost at the exact same time that the foam is getting, right? So no egg cartons, 1 inch foam, 2 inch foam if you can find it, even on Amazon for whatever brand you find. 2 inch is going to be just enough to actually keep the majority of the top end of the human voice from coming back to you when you're strapping it to the wall. And guess what, buddy? If you do both, best of all worlds. So moving blankets and RLX on the walls, right? So, okay, so the technique that I think everybody needs to hear, there are YouTube videos out of this, and I have no idea what the name is. I'll just call it the mirror technique for reflections, audio reflections or whatever. Jump on YouTube. Man, I wish I had that in my presentation. Note to self, I need to add, find a good YouTube video. But here's the technique. All right, I'm in a square room, right? And I grab my loved one and hand them the big makeup mirror, right? And they're going to think you're an idiot and really wonder why you're trying to make them do this. But I have a wall directly to my left. It is 90 degrees I'm an idiot. Perpendicular to me. So my voice is literally going that way. It's going to hit that wall. It's like my old high school teacher is really mad at me right now. It's going to hit that wall and it's going to bounce right back into this microphone, right? So the technique is have your loved one put that mirror right on that wall and they're going to move it until because you're the source of your audio, right? Your mouth is going to make audio. It's going to hit that wall. And then the mirror is emulating the bounce. So if you can see the microphone in that mirror, that's first reflection. You're going to do this for your tabletop, by the way, too. It's going to seem ridiculous, but I actually have some of that padding for like shelving, like for a silverware drawer where like you don't want the silverware plastic thing to sit in your drawer. So some shelving liner, that's what it's called, shelving liner. And I actually have it on my tabletop. Right? You get some black one, gray one. They have them in all kinds of colors. You can make them look pretty decent. And you just put it on top of your tabletop as well. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be something, right? And then that mirror technique, you're actually going to move it over there. Then you're going to go over to that wall. And if you're in a square room, it's going to be pretty simple, right? It's going to be your tabletop. It's going to be the ceiling directly above you. It's going to be the wall directly in front of you. The walls directly to your sides. The back's not as bad, obviously, because, my head's in the way. And if your head's in the way, that's not great. But what you're going to get is this bouncing back and forth between the walls. So it's good to go into those places. If you're positioned, if you're turned, or if you're in a room where it's even walls, you just have that person just walk around the room. And every time you can see the microphone from where you're talking, it's going to be basically look where you are. So I can already hear all the people who have multiple people in their podcast screaming at me, right? And yes, it is going to get weird. You have a 4-person podcast and they're sitting in that traditional circle with everybody looking at each other, right? Yes, you do in fact have to do that for every seat and every mouth. If I'm talking here and that mic is over there, I need that mirror to do that. What that typically translates to, because you're usually fairly close together, is a bigger cluster of padding or foam in that area, right? So my mouth from here to there, isn't too far. So maybe I have to move the mirror 2 feet to the right, and then I see the other microphones. That's where a foam pad goes as well. So if you get bigger foam pads, or if you just custom make your own, there's a ton of DIY videos out there as well. Have some fun with it, but you need to cover those reflection points, and the more you cover, the better your audio is going to be.
Ryan, as we wrap up here, first of all, thank you. And then if people want to reach out to you, maybe they have a question or they want to just get connected and know what's going on with Rode, what do you recommend there?
Place to start, info@rode.com is a great place to get the company as a whole. And then I'm personally at ryan.white@rode.com, and I do give that out. I travel the US teaching people about microphones. If you're interested in talking more about your specific setups, by all means, reach out to me. And if you're interested in the Rode products, I'm here as the product specialist for those products. So I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can, and we'll talk.
Well, Ryan, we are grateful, and hope you have an excellent afternoon. And hopefully we'll see you in Nashville in August. Yes. And thank you again.
Thank you guys for having me very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
See you in August.